Colonel Hargrove grabbed Ava by the collar and slammed her back against the metal wall of the command tent so hard the whole structure shook. "You think this is a war movie, Private?" He snarled, his face inches from hers, spit hitting her cheek. "You picked up a weapon you were never authorized to touch. You took a shot nobody ordered you to take." He shoved her again harder. "You are a box carrier. That is all you are. And when I'm done with you, you'll be lucky to be carrying anything at all." Behind him, 8 soldiers stood in silence. 8 soldiers whose lives Ava Morales had saved 24 hours ago. Before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment and tell me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to where it all started. Private Ava Morales had a system. Every morning at 0500, she was already up before her alarm, lacing her boots in the dark, running the same mental checklist she had run every single day for the past 6 months. Ammunition crates, check. Medical supply bags, check. Water purification tablets, radio batteries, MRE rations, spare comms equipment, check, 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 and check. She didn't need anyone to tell her what to do. She already knew. She had always already known. That was the thing about Ava, that nobody around her bothered to notice she was 3 steps ahead of every request before the request was even made. But being 3 steps ahead didn't make you visible in Task Force Phantom. Nothing made you visible in Task Force Phantom unless you carried a rifle and a kill count. She had learned that within her first week. She had learned it from the way Sergeant Decker looked through her when she handed him his ammunition like she was a vending machine and not a person. She had learned it from the way the team ate together at one end of the mess and she sat alone at the other. Not because anyone told her to, but because the message was so clear it didn't need to be spoken. Supply runners weren't soldiers. They were furniture. Necessary, yes. But furniture doesn't get a seat at the table. Furniture just holds things up while real people do real work. Ava was 23 years old and she had been furniture for 6 months. She was getting very tired of it. What nobody knew, what she had never told a single person in that camp, was that during her basic training evaluation, she had outscored every other recruit on the rifle range. Not by a little, by a lot. Expert marksman. The kind of score that makes an instructor stop and look twice, then look at you, then look back at the paper because the numbers don't line up with the person standing in front of them. She wasn't big. She wasn't loud. She didn't walk around with the swagger that the other high scorers carried like a second uniform. She was quiet and she was precise, and she put every bullet exactly where she meant to put it every single time. Her commanding officer at the time had written one line in her file: impressive range scores, assigned to supply logistics per unit needs. And that was that. She never questioned it out loud. She was 22 at the time, and she had been raised to believe that you put your head down and you do the job you are given, and eventually the right people notice. Her grandmother had told her that. Her mother had told her that. Every woman in her family had lived by that rule and had the quiet dignity to show for it. What none of them had told her was that sometimes the right people are too busy looking at the wrong things to ever notice anything at all. The day everything changed started like every other day. 0500. Boots laced, checklist running. She was halfway through loading the second ammunition crate into the transport vehicle when she heard Corporal James Reed behind her. Everyone called him Reed, whistling low and slow, which was never a good sign. Reed only whistled when something was wrong. It was his tells, the same way some people bite their nails or tap their fingers. Reed whistled. "What?" Ava said, not turning around. "Satellite intel," Reed said, dropping his voice even though there was nobody close enough to hear them. "Word is the enemy has been repositioning, moving a shooter team into the ridge above Sector 7. Ava turned around then. "How confirmed?" "Confirmed enough that Morrison's called an emergency brief for 0630. She looked at him. "You're telling me because..." Reed shrugged, but his eyes weren't casual. "Because your route today runs through Sector 7. She let that sit for a second. "I'll radio in before I move," she said. "Yeah." He didn't sound convinced. "Do that." She went back to loading the crate, but her hands had slowed down without her telling them to. Sector 7. She knew that quarter. She had run it 11 times in the past 2 months. It was tight, rocky, with only 2 points of actual cover if something went wrong. The kind of route that was manageable on a calm day and catastrophic if someone with a long rifle was sitting above you on that ridge. She told herself it would be fine. She told herself that at 0600. By 0930, it was not fine. The emergency brief had ended 30 minutes earlier than she expected, which meant the timeline had moved. Morrison had pushed the main team into Sector 7 ahead of schedule, a quick strike and retreat operation targeting a weapons cache the intel said was 3 hours from being moved. Task Force Phantom was the blade fast and precise. Ava's job was to follow 2 kilometers behind with the secondary supply rig, wait for the extraction signal, and be at the rally point when they came out the other side. Simple. Clean. She had done it a dozen times. She was parked behind a rock formation, engine off, waiting when she heard it. Not an explosion, something worse than an explosion. Silence. The radio had been alive with Phantom's comms, short clip, professional. She had been monitoring on her earpiece the way she always did, not because she was supposed to, but because it helped her anticipate what they would need when they came out. And then mid-sentence, mid-operation, the comms went to static. She sat very still. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then she heard it through the static. Not words, not clean transmission, but sound. Someone yelling. A burst of gunfire so dense it hit like a wall. And then Morrison's voice cutting in and out, cracked and urgent, in a way she had never heard from him in 6 months. Phantom, we have contact, Northeast Ridge. Multiple shooters. Park is down. I repeat, Park is down. Park. Sergeant Daniel Park. The sniper. The best shot in the entire unit. And that was not flattery, that was fact. The man could thread a needle at 1,000 meters and do it in a crosswind. He was the reason Task Force Phantom operated the way it did, aggressive. Close, trusting that Park on the ridge would neutralize any threat before it became a threat. The whole team's tactics were built around his eyes and his trigger finger. And he was down. She was out of the vehicle before she had made a conscious decision to move. She didn't think about it later as a choice. She thought about it as gravity, the way your hand reaches for something falling before your brain registers that it's falling. Pure reflex, except in this case, the reflex had been building for 6 months of being told she was nothing but a supply runner, and something inside her had finally said very quietly, not anymore. She grabbed her sidearm out of habit, then stopped. She looked at Park's secondary case in the back of the supply rig. She had loaded it herself this morning. Hadn't she? The long rifle packed for transport because Park had asked for it to be moved to the secondary vehicle as a backup after he'd adjusted his primary scope yesterday. It was there because she had put it there, because that was her job. Logistics, knowing where things were. She opened the case. Her hands were steady. She noticed that. She had expected them to shake, expected something in her body to resist what she was doing, but her hands were completely steady, and she thought somewhere distant, almost clinical, that maybe that said something about her, and she wasn't entirely sure what. She took the rifle. She ran. The sound of the firefight got louder as she moved, and louder still, and she kept her body low and her path between cover and cover, like she had mapped this corridor in her sleep, because she had, essentially. Running it 11 times means you stop seeing it consciously. You feel it instead. Left at the broken wall, down the slope, not across it, right against the cliff face until the rock overhang, then push forward. She came around the final bend, and the scene hit her like something physical. Task Force Phantom was pinned. She could see them, Decker and Morrison, behind a crumbled wall. Richards and Chen, down flat in the dirt, using the angle of the terrain for what little cover it gave them. They were returning fire, but their fire was scattered, reactive. There was an enemy sniper on that ridge. She couldn't see him, but she could track him by the pattern. Every time one of them tried to move, they were immediately suppressed. One precise round right in the path of movement, not trying to hit them, trying to freeze them, keep them in position until the ground team closed in from the west. And the ground team was closing. She could see the dust from their movement. 3 minutes, maybe 4. Morrison's voice came over the radio again, ragged and desperate. If someone doesn't take out that shooter, we're done. We are done. Does anyone copy? We need suppression on that ridge now. Nobody copied, because they were all pinned down with pistols and short rifles, and the target was 400 meters up a ridge in a hide that he'd had time to build, and without Park, there was not a single person in that group with the range or the skill to reach him. Ava keyed her to radio. This is Morales, supply. I have Park secondary. I have a shot. Talk me through the target. Dead silence on the comms. It lasted maybe 3 full seconds, which in that moment felt like a year. Then Morrison's voice came back, and there was something in it she had never heard before. Not authority, not command, but something rawer than that. Something that sounded a lot like desperate hope. Morales, Northeast Ridge, 40 degrees elevation. He's in a crevice just right of the split rock. You have a window of maybe 2 meters. He's been shifting every 30 seconds, but his pattern is left, wait, right, wait, left. Copy, she said. Morales, Decker's voice now sharp and rough. You have any idea what you're about to do? Yeah, she said. I'm about to take a shot. She found the position before he could say anything else. Belly down behind a natural ledge that gave her a clean angle north, her elbows on the rock, the rifle settling into her shoulder like it had always been there. 830 meters. She estimated it before she even looked through the scope. 11 times through this corridor. She knew this terrain. She pressed her eye to the scope. There it was, the split rock, the crevice, right of center just where Morrison had said. She waited. The shooter moved left exactly as Morrison had said. He was cautious, only exposing himself in the moment he needed to fire. She tracked him, let her breathing slow, felt the crosshair settle. Her grandmother used to say that the world goes quiet before something important happens. Ava had always thought that was just something old women said. Wisdom dressed up in poetry. She understood it now. Everything went completely, totally, absolutely quiet. She exhaled, half breath, hold. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked against her shoulder, harder than she remembered, different weight distribution than the rifle she had trained with, and for one suspended moment, she wasn't sure, she genuinely wasn't sure. And then Morrison's voice exploded over the radio and she understood. Target down, northeast ridge. He is down. She didn't feel what she expected to feel. She didn't have time to feel anything because Morrison was already talking again, already moving, already calling the team into the advance that had been impossible 30 seconds ago and was now suddenly possible. And she heard them moving, heard the shift in the firefight, heard the ground team that had been closing from the west get hit by something they hadn't expected, phantoms surging forward instead of collapsing, and the whole shape of the fight changed in the space of about 90 seconds. She lay behind that ledge with Park's rifle and she watched through the scope, and she did not move until it was over. It was over in 11 minutes. 11 minutes from the moment the target on the ridge went down to the moment the last gunshot echoed off the canyon walls, and the silence came back, a different silence this time, not the held breath silence of a fight in progress, but the exhaled silence of a fight that had ended. She heard them before she saw them. Boots on rock. Decker's voice still sharp, but no longer frantic, relaying positions. Morrison calling for a medical assessment on Park, who was alive. She heard that alive, but badly wounded, and that fact hit her somewhere private and tender, and she pressed her eyes shut for exactly 1 second, and then opened them again. She got up. She walked around the edge of the rock, rifle lowered, slung properly the way she had been trained. The team saw her at the same moment, all of them, and she watched something pass across their faces in sequence: recognition, confusion, calculation, and then something she had never seen any of them direct at her before. Respect. Not the comfortable automatic kind. Not the kind you give someone after they've done something expected. The kind that comes out hard and reluctant and real because the person in front of you has just done something you didn't know was possible, and your whole picture of them has to rearrange itself in real time. Decker stared at her for a long moment. 800 meters, he said. It wasn't a question. 830, she said. He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh and wasn't quite something else. He looked at her the way you look at a stranger. Not in a bad way, in the way of someone who has just discovered that a person they thought they knew completely was actually someone they didn't know at all. Morrison stepped forward. He was a tall man, Lieutenant Colonel David Morrison, broad-shouldered and weathered in the specific way of someone who had spent 20 years making hard calls in hard places. He looked at Ava for a moment, and then he looked at the rifle slung over her shoulder, and then he looked back at her. That was Park's secondary, he said. Yes, sir. You loaded the secondary vehicle this morning. Yes, sir. You knew it was there. Yes, sir. He held her gaze for another long moment. Then very quietly, so that only she could hear it, he said, that shot just saved my life and every life standing behind me. She didn't know what to say to that. She had never been the person someone said that to. She had been the person who handed other people what they needed so they could be that person. She said the only thing she could think of. It was the right shot to take, sir. Morrison nodded slowly. Something shifted in his expression. He looked like a man making a decision, the kind of decision that he knew he was going to have to explain to someone with more stars on his shoulder. He looked like a man deciding whether or not to care about that. Apparently, he decided not to. Get Park stable for transport, he said, turning to the rest of the team. Morales, you're on point with me until we hit the rally point. You keep that rifle. She didn't move for a second. Sir, she said, you heard me. She had heard him. She moved. She moved, and she didn't look back at the ledge. And she didn't look at the place on the ridge where a man had been alive and was no longer alive because she had made a choice and executed it with precision. And she told herself that she would look at all of that later. That later was when she would let herself feel the full weight of what had happened today. But right now there was a team to get out of a canyon and a wounded man who needed to reach a medical facility and a job to do. She had always been very good at doing the job, What she was only now beginning to understand was that the jump had never really been carrying boxes. Not for her, not ever. It had just taken one impossible shot on a ridge above Sector 7 for the rest of the world to figure out what she had quietly known for a very long time. The problem with being invisible for 6 months is that the moment you become visible to everyone, including the people who preferred you invisible. She didn't know about Colonel Hargrove yet. She didn't know that back at the main base 40 kilometers away, a man with a very different read on what had happened today was already making phone calls, already drafting memos, already assembling the case for why what Private Morales had done was not heroism, but insubordination. Why the correct outcome of today was not commendation, but censure. She didn't know any of that yet. She just walked through the canyon with Park's rifle on her shoulder, and Morrison 2 steps to her left, and for the first time in 6 months, she walked like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She was 23 years old. She had just made an 830-meter kill shot with a rifle she had never been assigned to carry in a firefight. She had not been ordered to enter saving the lives of a team that had never once looked at her like she was a real soldier. And she was still walking. That mattered. She told herself it mattered. That whatever was coming next, whatever reckoning waited for her back at base, she had made that shot, and they had all made it out, and Park was alive. And those 3 facts stood on their own solid and real, regardless of what came after. The rally point was 20 minutes on foot. She made it in 16. Reed was waiting with the transport vehicle. He saw her come around the corner with the team, saw the rifle, saw Morrison's position relative to her, and his face went through the same rearrangement she had watched happen to Decker and the others. She saw the moment he understood. He met her eyes. He nodded once. It wasn't much, but it was something. The vehicles loaded. Park was secured in the back of the first transport, unconscious, but stable, his breathing even. Someone had put a blanket over him, and she noticed the small human decency of it, and felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't known was tight. She climbed into the passenger seat of the second vehicle. Morrison climbed in beside her and started the engine and pulled onto the road, and for the first 15 minutes, nobody spoke. Then he said without looking at her, "Where did you learn to shoot like that?" "Basic training," she said. "What was your range score?" she told him. He was quiet for a moment. "Who evaluated you?" She told him that too. Another silence. "And they put you in logistics." "Supply runner, yes, sir." He said something under his breath that she didn't catch and didn't ask him to repeat. They drove in silence for another few minutes. Then Morales, "When we get back to base, I need you to write up everything that happened today. Everything. Your position, your read on the target, your shot process, all of it. I want it detailed. I want it accurate. And I want it done before anyone else gets to you." She looked at him. "Gets to me." He glanced over. His expression was careful, the way a man looks when he is choosing how much truth to let out at once. "There are people who are going to have opinions about today," he said. "I want your record on file before those opinions start taking shape." She understood what he was telling her, even if he was being careful about how he told it. She was not naive. She had grown up a brown girl in a system that had very fixed ideas about where people like her fit and what they were allowed to be, and she knew exactly what it felt like when the system decided that your success was a problem to be managed rather than a fact to be acknowledged. She had just made a shot that saved 8 lives, and someone was already figuring out how to make that her fault. "I'll write it up, sir," she said. "Good." He looked back at the road. "You did something extraordinary today, Morales. I want that on record before anyone gets the chance to call it something else." She pressed her back against the seat and looked out the window at the landscape moving past. The rifle was across her knees. She did not put it down. She hit the wall and she did not fall. That was the thing. That was the part that nobody in that tent expected, including Hargrove. He had shoved her hard enough that her shoulder blades cracked against the metal panel, and the whole frame of the tent shuddered, and every person in that room went completely rigid, and Ava Morales did not slide down the wall, did not grab for something to steady herself, did not make a sound. She just stood there, back straight, eyes on him. Hargrove stared at her. Something moved in his face, not embarrassment. Men like Hargrove didn't do embarrassment, but something close to frustration. The frustration of a man who has applied force and not gotten the reaction the force was supposed to produce. "Dismissed," he said. She didn't move immediately, and that half second of stillness was its own statement. Then she turned, picked up her cap from the floor where it had fallen, put it back on her head with both hands, squared it, and walked out of the tent. The cold air outside hit her face, and she kept walking. She walked past the motor pool, past the medical bay, where she could see the light on through the canvas, past the row of sleeping tents, all the way to the far edge of the compound, where the supply vehicles were parked in a line. She stopped at the third one, her vehicle, the one she ran every day, and she put both hands flat on the hood, and she breathed. In, out, in, out. Her shoulder was going to bruise. She could already feel it, a deep ache radiating down toward her elbow. She rotated the joint, carefully testing it the way you check a thing you need to keep using. It worked. She was fine. She told herself she was fine. 8 minutes. She heard the footsteps behind her before the voice came, because she had been in this compound long enough to know everyone's footstep pattern. This one was Reed, slightly uneven, right foot heavier than the left old knee injury that he never talked about. Hey, he said, hey. He came and stood next to her, not touching, not making a big production of it, just standing there the way he had stood next to her 100 times while they loaded vehicles in the dark. How bad, he asked. Bruise, nothing structural. That's not what I asked. She looked at him sideways. Reed was 31, angular, with the kind of face that was always slightly more alert than it needed to be. He had never talked to her the way the rest of the team ignored her, but he hadn't exactly gone out of his way either. He occupied the middle space, the polite distance, the careful neutral. She had always respected it without particularly valuing it. Right now, in the dark next to her vehicle, the careful neutral was gone and something more direct had replaced it. I've seen Hargrove do that to 3 other soldiers, Reed said. 2 of them filed reports. Both reports disappeared. The third one requested a transfer and got one to the worst posting in the region. I'm not filing a report, she said. I know. That's not why I'm telling you. He paused. I'm telling you because you need to know who you're dealing with. He's not just angry because you broke protocol. He's angry because Morrison backed you. In front of everyone. Hargrove found out before you even got back to base. She processed that. How? Comms. Reed's jaw tightened slightly. Someone on the team reported in while you were still at the rally point. Said you'd taken Park secondary and made the shot, and that Morrison had put you on point. She was quiet for a moment. Who reported it? Reed didn't answer right away. Reed. Chen Puerto, he said. She absorbed that without reacting outwardly, though something inside her did react, something that felt like a door closing on a room she hadn't fully entered yet. Chen. Quiet, professional, efficient Chen, who she had handed ammunition to 17 times and who had never once said thank you or her name. All right, she said. Ava. He never used her first name. She registered it. Hargrove is building something. He's been on the phone with command since this morning. He's framing yesterday as an unauthorized weapons incident. Not the shot, not the kill, not the lives saved, but the fact that you picked up a weapon without orders. She turned to look at him fully. Can he make that stick? He can try. Reed met her eyes. Morrison's writing his report tonight. He asked me to tell you, write yours first. Whatever he told you in the vehicle, do it tonight. Timestamp it. Get it into the system before morning briefing. He already told me that. I know. I'm telling you again because tonight might be shorter than you think. She didn't ask him to explain that. She just nodded once and pushed off the hood. Thanks, she said. Don't thank me. He looked away. Just write the report. 16 minutes, twist 1. She was at her bunk with her field notebook open and a pen in her hand when the flap of her tent opened and the last person she expected walked in. Sergeant Decker. He stood in the entrance for a moment looking at her with that expression he'd had since the canyon, like he was still recalibrating, still running the math on who she actually was. Then he stepped inside and let the flap fall shut behind him. Morrison sent me, he said. Reed already told me about the report. Not about the report. Decker reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He held it out. Park wants to see you. She stared at the paper, then at Decker. He's conscious. Woke up an hour ago. Doc says he's stable. He's asking for you specifically. Decker's voice was flat, professionally neutral, but something behind his eyes wasn't neutral at all. You don't have to go. She took the paper. It was a room number in the medical bay written in what was clearly a nurse's handwriting. Hurried, slanted like someone had written it while talking. Below the room number in shakier script that she recognized as someone writing with their non-dominant hand because their dominant arm wasn't available were 4 words. I heard. Thank you. She folded the paper and put it in her breast pocket. I'll go, she said. Decker nodded and turned to leave. Then he stopped, hand on the tent flap, back still to her. For what it's worth, he said, and then stopped. She waited. I've been in this unit for 4 years, he said. I have never seen a shot like that. Not from trained snipers. Not from anyone. He paused. We all should have. Another pause. I'm sorry we didn't see you. He left before she could respond. She sat for a moment in the silence he had left behind, the pen still in her hand, The notebook opened to a blank page. Then she closed the notebook, put the pen in her pocket, and went to see Park, 24 minutes. The medical bay smelled like antiseptic, and something underneath it that she had learned to identify as the specific smell of bodies under sustained stress. Not unpleasant, just unmistakably human, unmistakably real. She moved past two other occupied cots and stopped at the curtained partition at the far end. She pushed the curtain aside. Park was smaller than she remembered. That was her first thought, and it surprised her he was not a small man, 5'11", broad through the shoulders, the kind of physical presence that filled a room without trying. But lying in that cot with his left arm bandaged from shoulder to elbow, and his face the specific gray-white of someone who had recently lost significant blood, he looked reduced. Human in a way that combat-trained soldiers were not usually permitted to look. He saw her, and something changed in his face. Not relief. Something deeper than relief. Something that she didn't have an easy word for. "Morales," he said. His voice was rougher than usual, dry from anesthesia or pain medication, or both. "Park." She came to the side of the cot. "How bad?" "Shattered the ulna. Nicked an artery. Doc says 3 months minimum before I'm back in the field." He paused. "If I'm back in the field." She didn't offer false comfort. She could see on his face that he didn't want it. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be." His eyes were very clear for someone who had just come out of surgery. "Tell me about the shot." She blinked. "You want me to?" "Tell me about the shot," he said again. "Everything, start to finish." She pulled the chair from beside the curtain and sat down. And she told him. All of it. The position she'd found, the estimate she'd made on distance, how she'd tracked the pattern. Morrison described the wind reading the breath control. She told it the way she would have written it in the report, precise, sequential, without embellishment. Park listened without interrupting. His eyes didn't leave her face. When she finished, the silence held for a moment. Then he said, 830 meters, crosswind. First shot. Yes. With my secondary, which you'd never fired. Correct. He stared at her for a long moment. I qualified expert at 800, he said, in controlled conditions. On a range. He paused. What was your qualifying score? She told him. His expression shifted in a way she could not fully read. Not quite surprised, more like someone having a suspicion confirmed that they had been caring for a while without quite knowing where to put it. They put you in supply, he said. Yes. Wipe unit needs, she said, the official answer. The answer that had been on the paper 6 months ago. Park looked at the ceiling for a moment, then back at her. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped slightly, become more direct, the way people speak when they have decided to stop being careful. When I'm cleared to return, he said, I'm going to recommend you for formal sniper evaluation. Not as a courtesy, because your instincts under fire are the kind of thing you cannot teach, and it would be criminal waste not to develop. She opened her mouth and then closed it. Hargrove will block it, she said. Hargrove does not have authority over special operations training evaluations. Morrison does. Park's jaw set in a way that reminded her that despite the hospital cot and the gray face, this was still one of the most effective combat soldiers in the region. And Morrison already agrees with me. We talked before they brought me into surgery. I had 12 minutes of clarity before the anesthesia, and I used them. She sat with that for a second. Park, she said slowly, you were going into surgery. Correct. And you spent part of that time coordinating my career path. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, something smaller and more sincere than a smile. You saved my team, he said. You saved me. Not Morales, I don't mean that abstractly. I mean they told me when I was coming out of it that the ground element was 3 minutes from our position when that sniper went down. 3 minutes. I was lying in the open. I couldn't move. If that ground team had reached us, he stopped. You understand what I'm saying? She understood. I did what needed to be done, she said. So did I, he said. Get out of here and go write your report. And Morales, don't minimize anything. Not the distance, not the conditions, not the decision process. Write it like what it was. She stood. What was it? She asked. It was the best shot anyone in this unit has taken in 3 years, he said. Write it like that. 32 minutes, twist 2. The report took her 2 hours. She wrote it 3 times, not because she got it wrong, but because the first version was too spare, stripping down to bare facts in the way she had learned to make herself small. And she kept hearing Park's voice saying, write it like what it was. And on the third version, she let herself take up the space the moment had actually occupied. She submitted it to the secure system at 0147. She was asleep by 0215. She was woken at 0330 by Reed's hand on her shoulder and the low, urgent sound of his voice saying her name, and she was upright before she was fully conscious, body responding to the tone before her brain caught up to the words. "What?" she said. "Hargrove's called an emergency disciplinary hearing. 0400. She stared at him in the darkness. "That's in 30 minutes. "I know. That's not standard procedure." "No," Reed said, "it is not." She was dressed in 4 minutes. She was outside in 5. The compound was not asleep. She could see lights moving, could hear voices at a pitch that meant something was happening, something beyond the normal rhythms of a forward operating base at night. Morrison was waiting outside the command tent. He looked at her when she came around the corner, and something in his expression told her he had not slept. He looked like a man who had spent the last several hours in a very fast-moving fight that had not yet been decided. "He's moving faster than I anticipated," Morrison said quietly. "Can he hold a disciplinary hearing at 0400? "He outranks me," Morrison said. "He has the authority. What he doesn't have..." He stopped, looked at her carefully. "Did you submit the report?" 0147. Something released in his face. Not much, just slightly. "Good." He reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. "This is a formal commendation. I signed it tonight. Park co-signed it from the medical bay. The attending physician witnessed it. It's in the system." He held her gaze. "Hargrove doesn't know about the co-sign yet." She took the document, looked at it. Her name was on it, her rank, her unit, and below that in clear and unambiguous language a description of what she had done and why it had mattered. Morrison's words, and below them, Park's signature, shaky and slanted from writing with the wrong hand, but there. She folded it and put it in her breast pocket next to Park's note. "Here's what's going to happen," Morrison said, and his voice had shifted into the particular register he used when he was briefing a mission, clear and precise and absent of anything that was not strictly necessary. "Hargrove is going to attempt to classify your actions yesterday as an unauthorized weapons incident. He'll frame it as a breach of orders, a breakdown of command structure, a potential safety violation. He will not mention the outcome. He will not mention the 8 lives. He will focus entirely on the fact that you deviated from your assigned role without explicit authorization." Ava listened. "He's going to ask you whether you had orders to pick up that rifle," Morrison continued. The honest answer is that you did not. He knows that. He's going to use it." And she said, Morrison looked at her steadily. "And I am going to argue that the circumstances created an emergency exception that is entirely supported by standing rules of engagement, which they do, which it is." He paused. "But Hargrove has command's ear in a way that I do not, and this could go in a direction that neither of us wants." She was quiet for a moment. "What direction?" she said. "Discharge," Morrison said. "Misconduct adjacent, not a court-martial. He doesn't have enough for that, but the kind of mark that follows a service record, the kind that closes doors." The words sat between them in the cold air. Discharge. She breathed through her nose. Slow, controlled, the way she had breathed before she squeezed the trigger yesterday. "All right," she said. Morrison looked at her like he was checking her, the way you check a weapon before a mission, not doubting it, just making sure all the pieces are seated correctly. "You're not afraid," he said. It was not quite a question. "I'm terrified," she said, "but afraid and terrified are not the same thing." He studied her for another moment. Then he said, "Let's go." 40 minutes audience hook. The hearing was held in the largest interior space in the command structure, not because there were many people present, but because Hargrove understood staging. He understood that where you conduct a proceeding shapes how the proceeding feels, and a large space with a single subject standing in the center of it communicates a very specific thing about power and where it is located. Ava stood in the center. Hargrove sat behind the table with 2 officers she didn't recognize flanking him. Both senior, both with the carefully neutral expressions of men who had been told to observe and not to engage. On the far side of the room, technically outside the formal space, technically just present, stood Decker, Reed, and Richards. Nobody had told them to come. Nobody had told them not to. They were there. Hargrove opened the file in front of him without looking at her. Private Ava Morales, Supply and Logistics Task Force Phantom, assigned to Forward Operating Supply, Route Sector 70900 yesterday. He turned a page. At approximately 0952, you deviated from your assigned route and position, entered an active combat zone, accessed a weapon to which you were not assigned, and discharged that weapon without a direct order from a superior officer. He looked up then. "Is that an accurate summary of events?" Ava looked at him directly. "It's accurate in its facts," she said. "It's incomplete in its context." Hargrove's eyes went flat. "This is not a conversation, Private. I asked if the summary is accurate." You asked if it was an accurate summary of events, she said. An accurate summary of events includes what was happening when those decisions were made. The officer on Hargrove's left shifted slightly in his seat, barely perceptible. Ava caught it. Hargrove's jaw tightened. The events are documented. You're unauthorized. The team's sniper was down, Ava said. The team was pinned. An enemy ground element was 3 minutes from their position. There was no authorized sniper available. There was an available weapon and an available soldier with the capability to use it. She kept her voice absolutely level. I made a decision based on the information I had and the skills I possess. The result was 8 confirmed survivors, including the ranking officer present. Silence. Hargrove leaned forward. You are a supply runner, Private. You are not authorized to make those decisions. With respect, sir, she said, and her voice did not shake even a fraction. The rules of engagement for emergency combat situations allow for independent action when a command gap exists and lives are at immediate risk. That provision exists precisely for situations like yesterday. Hargrove's face had gone very still, the kind of still that isn't calm, but is instead the surface tension on something that wants to boil. Where, he said slowly, did a supply runner learn to cite rules of engagement? I read, she said. One of the flanking officers made a sound that could have been a cough. Hargrove turned to Morrison. Lieutenant Colonel, you had a supply runner reading rules of engagement. I had a soldier serving in my unit, Morrison said from his position to Ava's right. As far as I'm aware, reading is not a restricted activity. This is not... Hargrove stopped. Reset. Morrison, your formal commendation has been noted. It has also been flagged as potentially premature given the active investigation. The commendation was countersigned by Sergeant Park, Morrison said, from the medical bay. 40 minutes post-surgery. A pause. The officer on Hargrove's right looked up from his notes. Hargrove looked like a man recalculating, rapidly, with numbers that were not adding up the way he needed them to add up. Park is, he started, the most decorated soldier in this unit, Morrison said, with an impeccable performance record, whose life was saved by the action we are currently discussing. He let that sit. Both his commendation and mine are in the formal record, timestamped from last night. The room was very quiet. Ava did not move. She stood exactly as she had been standing since she walked in, weight even hands at her sides, looking straight at Hargrove, and she thought somewhere beneath the fear that was real, and the clarity that was also real, that she had spent 6 months making herself invisible, and that she was never doing that again. Whatever happened in this room, whatever came after, she was never doing that again. Hargrove looked at her. She looked back. He was a powerful man, and she was a private with a bruised shoulder and a supply route, and the math of that should have been simple, except that her report was time-stamped at 0147, and Park's signature was on a commendation filed before 0200, and 8 soldiers had come out of Sector 7 alive, including the lieutenant colonel currently standing 4 feet to her right. And in the corner of the room, 3 members of Task Force Phantom had shown up at 0400 on no orders for no official reason and stood there. The math was not simple. Hargrove closed the file. This hearing is temporarily suspended pending review of all submitted documentation. His voice had gone careful, professional, stripped of the previous heat. Private Morales, you are restricted to base pending the outcome of that review. You are to have no contact with any member of Task Force Phantom on operational matters. He picked up the file. Dismissed. She turned and walked toward the exit. She was 3 steps from the door when Hargrove's voice came again, lower this time, aimed at her back rather than the room. This isn't over, Private. She stopped. She did not turn around. No, sir, she said clearly to the tent wall in front of her. It isn't. And she walked out. Reed fell into step beside her almost immediately, close enough that his shoulder touched hers briefly, a small, solid contact that communicated something she didn't have words for and didn't need them for. Decker was 2 steps behind. Then Richards. Nobody spoke until they were far enough from the command tent that their voices couldn't carry. Then Decker said, for the record, citing rules of engagement to Hargrove's face at 0400, that was the ballsiest thing I have seen in 4 years of active deployment. She almost laughed, something that was shaped like a laugh but had too many other things in it to be purely that. I wasn't trying to be ballsy, she said. I was trying to be accurate. Same result, Reed said. She looked at the sky. It was beginning to lighten at the edges, that particular gray-purple that came before the first real color of dawn, the moment the night begins negotiating with the day about who gets the sky next. She thought about Park in the medical bay. She thought about Morrison's expression when she'd said, afraid and terrified aren't the same thing. She thought about the bruise on her shoulder and the weight of the rifle across her knees in the vehicle coming back from the canyon. She thought about the shot. 830 meters, first round. The feeling she had not let herself feel since she'd squeezed the trigger finally arrived now quietly without drama. Not pride exactly, but something adjacent to it. Something that felt like standing up to full height after being in a crouch for a very long time. Something that felt in the most private and unexpectedly profound way, like recognition. She had always known who she was. The problem had been everyone else. The day was coming now, gray turning silver at the horizon, the compound beginning to stir with the sounds of morning routine. And somewhere in that compound, a man with a file and a phone and institutional power was preparing his next move. She knew it. She felt it the way you feel weather before it arrives. Whatever was coming, she was not going to be invisible for it. She turned to Reed and Decker and Richard standing behind her in the early light. "I need coffee," she said, "and then I need to think." Decker nodded once. "Medical bay kitchen." Park convinced the night nurse to keep a pot going. She looked at him. Park convinced her from a post-surgery hospital cot. "The man is persuasive," Decker said. She walked toward this medical bay, and the three of them walked with her, and the sky continued to negotiate with itself at the edges, and somewhere in the distance, the first bird of morning made its sound in the silence before the world fully woke up. She had been a supply runner, and then she had taken a shot, and the shot had changed everything. She just didn't know yet how much everything it had changed in what was already moving through channels above her rank beyond her visibility in the machinery of a system that had a long history of deciding what people like her were allowed to become. She was about to find out. The coffee was bad. It was always bad in a forward operating base, too strong, too bitter, made in a machine that hadn't been properly cleaned since the unit arrived. But Ava drank it standing up in the corner of the medical bay kitchen, and she was grateful for it in the specific way you are grateful for something ordinary when the extraordinary has been happening for too long without a break. Decker leaned against the opposite wall with his arms crossed, watching her in a way that was no longer the way he used to watch her. That much had changed, at least. Before, when he looked at her, there had been nothing behind the look. No read, no calculation, no real attention. She had been furniture to Decker the same as she had been furniture to everyone. Now he looked at her the way he looked at situations he was trying to understand. Like she was a problem he was actively working. She didn't mind it. She had spent 6 months being not looked at. Being looked at, even in this complicated way, felt like oxygen. "Hargrove's going to go to General Briggs," Decker said. "That's his next move." "You know this?" Morrison asked from the doorway. He had followed them without announcement, appearing in the entrance, with his jacket still on, and his expression still carrying the controlled urgency of the hearing. "I know Hargrove," Decker said. "Briggs is his man, has been for 7 years. If Hargrove wants this buried, Briggs is the shovel." Morrison looked at Ava. She was looking at the coffee in her cup. "Morales," he said. She looked up. "How are you holding up?" She considered lying, considered giving him the clean, competent answer. Then she thought about Park's voice saying, "Write it like what it was," and she said, "I'm processing." Processing what specifically? "The fact that I saved 8 lives 2 days ago and I might be discharged for it." She said it without self-pity, just as fact the way you state coordinates. "I'm processing the gap between those two things." Reed made a sound low in his throat. Not a word. Just a sound that meant he heard her. "You are not going to be discharged," Morrison said. "You don't know that." "No," he admitted. "I don't know it with certainty, but I know that I will spend every piece of authority I have to prevent it, and I know that Park will do the same, and I know that the documentation we filed last night is solid." He paused. "What I need to know is whether you trust that process." She looked at him for a long moment. "I trust you," she said. "I don't trust the process." Morrison held her gaze. Then he nodded slowly, like that was the honest answer, and he respected the honest answer, even if it wasn't the comfortable one. "Fair," he said. 8 minutes audience hook. It was Reed who heard it first. His head came up suddenly sharp and alert, the way an animal lifts its head when it catches a scent on the wind. He held up one hand, the gesture everyone on the team recognized, and the room went silent. Voices, outside, coming toward the medical bay. Not ordinary voices. The specific cadence of official movement, multiple people walking with purpose in the same direction. The kind of sound that in a military compound means something is happening that was not on any schedule. Morrison moved to the entrance and looked out, and whatever he saw made him step back from the entrance immediately and turn to face the room. "Briggs," he said, one word, everything in it. Ava set her coffee cup down on the counter with a sound that was very small and very final. General Briggs did not look like what she expected. She had built a picture in her head from context: Hargrove's superior, Hargrove's ally. The man with the shovel in the picture had involved someone physically imposing, theatrically authoritative. What came through the entrance of the medical bay kitchen was a trim, quiet man in his late 50s with close-cut gray hair and eyes that moved quickly and cataloged everything they touched. He was followed by two aides and, behind the aides, Hargrove, whose expression was that of a man who has played his highest card and is waiting to see the board change. Briggs looked at Morrison first. "David," he said, not a greeting, a marker, establishing that they were in the kind of relationship where first names were used and that relationship had just been activated for purposes of what was about to happen. "General," Morrison said. Then Briggs looked at Ava. He studied her for exactly the amount of time it takes to form a real impression of someone, not a glance, not a stare, but the specific focused attention of a man who has learned to read people quickly and accurately because his career has required it. "You're Morales," he said. "Yes, sir." "You made the shot." "Yes, sir." 830 meters. Hargrove tells me 800. I want to hear it from you. She blinked. Of all the things she had expected him to lead with, this was not it. 830, she said, estimated from 11 prior runs of that car rider, confirmed by Morrison's post-incident position assessment. Briggs glanced at Morrison. Morrison confirmed with a single nod. Briggs looked back at Ava. "Hargrove tells me you acted without orders." "In a command gap," she said. "Yes, sir." "He tells me you had no formal sniper training. Expert marksman qualification, basic training, no formal advanced sniper course. And you made an 830-meter confirmed kill on a first shot in the field conditions with an unfamiliar weapon." "Yes, sir." Briggs was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to Hargrove and said in the same level tone he'd been using throughout, "Richard, step outside." Hargrove's face moved a flash of something that was not quite shock, but was adjacent to it, the look of a man who has been removed from a play he was directing. He controlled it almost immediately, brought the professional surface back up, and walked out with the two aides. The entrance flap fell shut. Briggs pulled the single chair in the room away from the wall and sat down. He looked suddenly less like a general and more like a tired man in his late 50s who had been woken at an unreasonable hour and had not yet had sufficient coffee. "Sit," he said to Ava. She sat on the edge of the nearest counter. Morrison stayed standing, arms at his sides. "Here is my problem," Briggs said to neither of them specifically, more to the middle space between them. "I have a situation that contains two entirely true and completely incompatible facts. Fact one, Private Morales deviated from her assigned role and accessed a weapon without direct authorization. That is a breach of protocol. It is technically actionable." He paused. "Fact two, that breach of protocol resulted in the survival of 8 soldiers, including a lieutenant colonel and the unit's primary sniper. It also produced one of the most impressive individual marksmanship incidents in this theater of operations in the past 18 months. Another pause. "Hargrove wants me to resolve those two facts by pursuing the first one and ignoring the second. I am not inclined to do that." Ava kept her expression still. Morrison exhaled. "However," Briggs said, and the word carried weight, "I cannot simply set a precedent that soldiers can operate outside their designated roles whenever they personally judge the situation to warrant it. That is its own category of operational risk." He looked at Ava directly now. "You understand that?" "I understand it," she said. "I'd make the same decision again." Briggs looked at her steadily. "I know," he said. "That's actually what makes this manageable rather than complicated." 15 minutes twist 1. What Briggs said next changed the shape of everything. He said it quietly without ceremony, the way people deliver the things they have already fully decided before the meeting began. "I spoke to the Special Operations Training Command this morning at 0300. He reached into his jacket, not a file, not a document, just a small folded paper with handwriting on it that he glanced at and then folded again. "I described the shot, the conditions, your qualification score from basic training, your 6 months of operational observation in a forward unit, and I asked them a direct question." He looked at her. Their answer was also direct. "If the scores in the field incident are what the documentation says they are, Private Morales should have been in sniper evaluation 18 months ago." The room was completely silent. Ava did not move. 18 months ago, she said carefully, "I was in basic training." "From basic training," Briggs said without inflection, "the qualification scores should have flagged you immediately for advanced evaluation. They did not. That is an administrative failure that occurred before you ever arrived at this unit." He looked at Morrison. "It is not a failure of this unit." Morrison said nothing, but something moved in his jaw. "So here is what is going to happen," Briggs said. "The disciplinary hearing Hargrove convened this morning is going to close without action. The incident report will be reclassified as an emergency combat event with appropriate command gap provisions applied. Your report and the commendations filed by Morrison and Park will remain in the formal record." He paused. "And in 3 weeks, when Park's surgical recovery permits him to stand as a formal evaluating officer, you will begin advanced sniper qualification under Joint Special Operations and Task Force Phantom supervision." She heard it. She understood it. And still, some part of her brain refused to process it as real, because real things in her experience had always involved more resistance than this, more friction, more of the grinding institutional slowness that turned a supply runner into something more. "Sir," she said. Hargrove will not be a factor in your evaluation," Briggs said. "He has been informed this morning that his involvement in this matter is concluded. His concerns about protocol have been noted and addressed in the reclassification." Something passed through Briggs's eyes, brief, complicated. "Richard Hargrove is an excellent logistical commander. He is not someone I want near special operations personnel decisions." She processed that. Then she said the only thing that was honest. "Why are you doing this?" Briggs looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Because I have spent 31 years watching capable people get lost in systems that weren't built to find them. And I am at a point in my career where I would rather spend my authority correcting that than preserving the comfort of people who benefit from ignoring it." He stood up. "Also because 8 soldiers are alive and I am not interested in punishing the reason for that." He moved toward the entrance, stopped. "Morales, one more thing." "Sir." "What were you thinking?" And he said, "In the moment before you took the shot?" She thought about it. The actual honest answer. Not the clean answer, not the answer that sounded like a soldier in a film. "I was thinking about the wind," she said, "and whether I'd estimated the drift correctly, and then I stopped thinking, and I just knew." Briggs nodded slowly. "That's what they said you'd say," he said, and then he was gone, 24 minutes. The 3 weeks that followed were the strangest of her life. She was still officially on restricted to base status, while the reclassification processed through channels. Paperwork moved slowly even when generals pushed it, which meant she was not running supply routes, was not carrying boxes, was not doing the job she had done every day for 6 months. She was for the first time in her military career unassigned. It felt like standing in a doorway, neither in nor out. She spent the time in the gym on the range, the base range, the short one, a fraction of the distances she would eventually be expected to work at, and in the medical bay, where Park was recovering faster than his doctors had predicted and had opinions about everything. He had commandeered a whiteboard from somewhere and propped it against the wall of his recovery space. And every time she came to see him, there was something new on it. Wind charts, trajectory calculations, breathing exercises drawn in his cramped, precise handwriting, notes on position mechanics, on trigger, discipline, on the psychology of the long shot. What he called the space between decision and execution, the place where most shooters either found their capability or lost it. "You already know how to live in that space," he told her on the 4th day. "I saw it in how you described the shot. You didn't rush. You didn't force. You inhabited the moment." He tapped the whiteboard. "What I'm going to teach you is how to do it consistently, under any conditions. When you're exhausted, when you're injured, when the math is wrong and the conditions are impossible, and you have to do it anyway." "Like Sector 7, she said. "Sector 7 was your baseline," he said. "I want to take your ceiling." She looked at the board, at the numbers, in the diagrams, in the notes that were already covering half the surface, even though Park could barely lift his right arm. "Park," she said, "you should be resting." "I am resting," he said. "This is what I do when I rest. Normal people sleep. I'm not particularly interested in normal." He looked at her. "Neither are you. That's why you ran into that canyon." She didn't argue with that, because it was true. The thing that had sent her out of the vehicle and into the canyon with his rifle had not been calculation, and it had not been recklessness. It had been something much harder to name, the accumulated weight of 6 months of invisible capability finally reaching the precise moment where staying invisible cost more than it was worth. The moment where the gap between who she was and what she was being allowed to be became intolerable. She had run toward the firefight. She had not run away from herself. "What happens," she said slowly, "if I get to the evaluation and I can't reproduce it? What if the Sector 7 shot was the once? What if I'm just a supply runner who got lucky once?" Park looked at her with the specific patient impatience of someone who has heard the wrong question. "You know what the difference is between a sniper and someone who got lucky once," he said. "What?" "The sniper knows why the shot worked. You told me in this room in detail exactly why that shot worked. The wind reading, the breath timing, the pattern recognition, the decision to wait for the left movement instead of the right. That is not luck. Luck doesn't have a mechanism. What you described had a mechanism. He held her gaze. You didn't get lucky. You executed. You just haven't had anyone confirm that to you until now. She sat with that for a moment. Then my grandmother used to say the world doesn't owe you recognition. Your grandmother was right, Park said. The world doesn't owe it to you, but that doesn't mean you stop being what you are while you are waiting for it. 32 minutes twist 2. It was on the 9th day of restricted status that Chen came to find her. She was on the base range single target practice, working through a breath control exercise Park had written on a piece of notepaper and had Reed deliver because Park was not yet cleared to leave the medical bay. She heard footsteps approach and stop at a respectful distance, not Reed's uneven gait, not Decker's heavier tread. She fired the round she had been holding, watched it land, then lowered the weapon and turned. Chen stood 6 feet away with his hands in his jacket pockets, and the look of a man who has rehearsed something and is no longer sure of the words. She waited. I owe you an explanation, he said. You don't owe me anything, she said. I reported in, he said, from the rally point when you came around the corner with Morrison. He stopped. I didn't do it to hurt you. I want you to know that. She looked at him steadily. Why did you do it? Chen exhaled. Because what you did scared me. He said it with the difficulty of someone saying something true that reflects poorly on themselves. You were supply, and then you were what you were in that canyon. And I didn't know what that meant. For the team structure, for how we operated. I was thinking about all the wrong things and I made a call I shouldn't have made, and I didn't anticipate that Hargrove would use it the way he did, she said. No, Chen said quietly. I didn't anticipate that. She studied him for a moment. The thing was she believed him. She didn't want to believe him because believing him made it complicated, and complicated was harder than clear-cut. But she believed him. He hadn't reported in out of malice. He'd done it out of the specific fear that capable people inspire in people who have built their identity around a fixed structure. And then when the structure shifts, the fear looks for an outlet. She understood that fear. She had lived on the other side of it for 6 months. You can't take the call back, she said. No. And it didn't work out the way Hargrove wanted. No. So, she said, what do you want from me? Chen was quiet for a moment, then, nothing, I just needed you to know. He shifted his weight, and I wanted to say what you did in that canyon. I don't have the words for it. I've been in this unit for 2 years, and I've seen Park work at range, and I know what good shooting looks like. He met her eyes. What you did wasn't good shooting. It was something else. Something I don't have a name for. She picked the rifle up from the rest, checked the action out of habit. It was the right shot, she said, that's all. Chen nodded. He turned to go, then stopped the same way Decker had stopped at the tent flap 2 weeks ago. There must be something about her that made people stop and turn back, she thought. Something unfinished they kept catching at the edge of their departure. Morales, Chen said. For what it's worth, I'm glad you ran into that canyon. She looked at him. Me too, she said. 40 minutes audience hook. The evaluation notice came on the 16th day. Not a memo, not a message through Reed. Morrison came in person, which told her everything before he said a word. When a lieutenant colonel delivers a document in person, rather than through channels, the document has weight that requires a human being to carry it. He handed it to her. She read it, then read it again. The evaluation had been moved up. Not 3 weeks, 7 days. The reason stated in the clean bureaucratic language of official documents was operational necessity. Task Force Phantom had been handed a new mission window 18 days out, a high-priority target deep in territory that would require exactly the kind of long-range precision that the unit no longer had in Park, who would not be cleared for field duty for another 2 months minimum. The unit needed a sniper. The evaluation would determine whether Ava was that sniper. She looked up from the document. 7 days, she said. Park cleared it. Morrison said, immediately anticipating this question. He said, 7 days is enough. I want you to hear that from me directly. Park said, 7 days is enough. Park also said my baseline was Sector 7. 7 days is not enough time to raise a ceiling. He disagrees with you. Morrison folded his hands. He said, and I'm quoting him directly, that the ceiling is already there. The 7 days is just paperwork. She made a sound, not quite a laugh. He's insane. He's very possibly the best judge of sniper capability in this theater of operations, Morrison said. And he has been working with you for over 2 weeks. I trust his read. She looked at the document again. At her name in official font, followed by her rank, followed by a designation that was not supply and logistics, but something entirely different. Provisional Advanced Marksman Evaluation pending. She had never seen her name next to those words. She wasn't sure how to feel about it, and she wasn't sure she needed to decide yet. Morrison, she said, what happens if I fail the evaluation? He answered without hesitation. You return to supply logistics with a formal note in your file that you were considered for advanced evaluation and did not qualify. Your commendations remain. The Sector 7 incident remains classified as an emergency combat event. Your service record is clean. And the mission, we find another solution. And Hargrove, something moved in Morrison's expression. Not much, just a flicker. Hargrove submitted a formal grievance to Briggs 3 days ago regarding the reclassification, he said. Briggs closed it the same day. A pause. Richard Hargrove is a man who does not accept closed doors gracefully. I want you to know that. I want you to know that this is not over with him, regardless of the evaluation outcome. She absorbed that. I know, she said. And she did know. She had felt it. The quality of Hargrove's anger was not the kind that ran its course. It was the kind that went underground and waited. The kind that was patient in the way only wounded pride can be patient, because wounded pride has nothing but time and a very long memory. But that was a future problem. Right now, there was a document in her hand in 7 days between her and the evaluation, and Park's whiteboard full of notes waiting in the medical bay. Tell Park I'll be there in 10 minutes, she said. Morrison took the document back. I'll tell him. He started to go. Morrison, Deanity turned. Why does it feel like I've been fighting to prove something that should never have needed proving? He stood still for a moment. The question hung in the air between them, not rhetorical, genuinely asked, genuinely open. Because you have been, he said, simply, without cushioning it. And I'm sorry that's what it took. He held her gaze for one more second. But I'm glad you didn't stop fighting it. He left. She sat for a moment alone. Then she got up and went to see Park for 8 minutes. The next 7 days were the most intense of her life, and she had recently spent a week thinking she was going to be discharged, so the bar for intense was already elevated. Park had a system. She should have expected that Park was a man who organized everything in his systems, but the efficiency and precision of it still caught her off guard. Every morning at 0530, before anyone else was properly awake, she was in the medical bay running through the mental exercises he had built for her. Position mechanics, breath timing, wind reading drills that she ran entirely in her head, visualizing targets at distances he specified, calculating adjustments, verbalizing her process. Out loud, he said every morning when she started running the calculations silently, I need to hear your process, not just your answers. Any evaluator worth their certification is going to ask you to explain the shot before you take it. Your instincts are good, but instincts that can't be articulated don't transfer. They don't teach. They don't build. I've never had to explain it before, she said on the third morning. In Sector 7, I just moved through it. In Sector 7, you had adrenaline, an emergency, and 8 lives in the immediate balance, Park said. In an evaluation, you have observers and clipboards and the very specific psychological pressure of being watched and measured. Different kind of pressure requires different kind of mental architecture. How do you handle it? Park shifted his position in the cot. His mobility had improved significantly, though the right arm remained in a sling that he wore with obvious impatience. I remind myself that the shot is the same shot regardless of who is watching it, he said. The physics don't change. The target doesn't know it's an evaluation. The only thing that changes is what's happening in my head, and I control what happens in my head. He looked at her. You controlled it in Sector 7. You'll control it in the evaluation. You make it sound simple. It's not simple, he said. It's disciplined. Those are different things. Simple means it doesn't take effort. Disciplined means you apply effort so consistently that it looks simple from the outside. She thought about that through the rest of the day, through the afternoon range session with Decker, who had appointed himself her unofficial spotter without being asked and without making anything of it. Just showing up on the first afternoon and positioning himself appropriately and saying shot parameters in the clip professional tone he used for everything. And through the evening when Reed appeared with food that was marginally better than the standard ration and sat with her while she ate and didn't talk about the evaluation at all, which was its own form of support she hadn't known she needed until he provided it. On the 6th night, the night before the evaluation, she sat at the edge of her bunk and she thought about Hargrove. Not with fear exactly, with the specific alertness of someone who knows the threat is real and has not gone away, only temporarily redirected. Briggs had neutralized him for now. But Briggs would not always be in the room. And Hargrove had 7 years with Briggs, and she had approximately 3 weeks. That math didn't close in her favor long term. She thought about what winning the evaluation actually meant. Not just the certification, not just the designation on the paper. She thought about being inside that unit with a function that nobody could overlook, a role that required her capabilities rather than obscuring them. She thought about the mission 18 days out, the high priority target, the territory that would require exactly what she was trying to become. She thought about this bruise on her shoulder from where Hargrove had shoved her against the wall. The bruise had faded to yellow at the edges now. In another few days, it would be gone entirely. She thought about Park saying, "Write it like what it was." She thought about Decker at the tent flap saying, "I'm sorry we didn't see you." She thought about the shot. 830 meters. First round. Crosswind. Unfamiliar weapon. No orders. She lay back on the bunk and looked at the ceiling of the tent and let herself feel fully without the filter she had been maintaining the whole weight of the last 18 days. The hearing room at 0400 with Hargrove's hands on her collar and then his voice at her back saying, "This isn't over." Briggs in the kitchen with his folded paper and his 31 years. Park's whiteboard. Morrison's expression when he handed her the evaluation notice. All of it. She let herself feel all of it, and then she set it down. All of it. She set it down the way you set down a heavy thing you have been carrying so long, you forgot you were carrying it. Not because the weight wasn't real, because she needed her hands free. Tomorrow there was an evaluation, and she was going to pass it. Not for Hargrove, not for Morrison, not for the 8 soldiers whose lives had become the defining fact of her service record. Not even for Park, who had spent 16 days in a hospital bed building her a curriculum because he believed in what she could become. For herself. Because she had always been this. From the first shot on a basic training range when an instructor had looked at a paper and then looked at her and then looked at the paper again. From the moment she had lined up her first round and felt the specific stillness settle over her, like it was the most natural state in the world. She had always been this. Tomorrow the rest of the world was going to find out. The tent was quiet. The compound had settled into its nighttime rhythm. The soft sounds of a bass running on its overnight skeleton, distant and familiar. The particular silence of a place where people sleep when they can because they have learned not to take sleep for granted. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in 18 days, she slept without difficulty, without her mind running circuits, without the hearing and the document, and Hargrove's voice running on repeat in the dark. She slept like someone who has already made a decision and is just waiting for morning to execute it. Outside, somewhere into the compound, the wind moved in the direction it had been moving in all day north-northeast, approximately 12 miles per hour, with a slight variance at the low level that would need to be accounted for at range. She had already accounted for it. She had accounted for it 3 hours ago, running calculations in her head before she closed her eyes. 7 days, Park had said. The ceiling is already there. She believed him now. She was awake before the alarm. Not the startled, disoriented kind of awake, the clean kind, the kind where your eyes open and your mind is already running, already oriented, already exactly where it needs to be. She lay still for 30 seconds, running the wind calculation she had fallen asleep with, checking it against the sense memory of the air ball she could feel against the tent canvas. North-northeast, still there, maybe slightly stronger than last night. She adjusted the number in her head and filed it. Then she got up. 0515. The evaluation was at 0800. She had 2 hours and 45 minutes, which was exactly what she needed and not a minute more than that. She dressed in the dark by feel the same way she had dressed for 6 months of 0500 supply runs. The muscle memory of it was its own kind of steadiness. Boots laced, jacket on, cap squared. She picked up the rifle case from beside her bunk. Park had arranged for her to have an assigned weapon 2 days into the 7-day preparation, a decision that had required Morrison's signature and had produced a second formal objection from Hargrove that Briggs had reportedly closed without reading, and she walked out into the compound. The cold hit her face and she breathed it in. Reed was already at the range when she got there. She hadn't asked him to be. She had not asked any of them to be anywhere this morning specifically because she hadn't wanted to feel the weight of their expectation added to her own. But Reed was there standing at the observation position with his hands in his pockets, and when she came around the corner and saw him, she felt something shift in her chest. That was not resentment and not quite gratitude either, but something in between those two things that she didn't have a clean word for. "You don't have to be here," she said. "I know," he said. She set the case down and opened it. "I'm not going to talk to you," she said, "while I'm running the warm-up." "I know that too," he said. She looked at him for a second. He was looking out at the range, not at her, giving her the privacy of his profile rather than his face, and she understood it as the specific courtesy it was. She turned to the range and went to work. 8 minutes audience hook. The evaluation board assembled at 0750. 3 officers, One she recognized Major Tran from Special Operations Training Command, who she had never spoken to, but had seen twice in the compound in the past week, a compact woman in her early 40s with the watchful stillness of someone accustomed to seeing what other people miss. The second was a man she didn't recognize, a captain with SOTC insignia and an expression of practiced neutrality. The third was Park. Park was not supposed to be there. He was not cleared for field movement. His doctor had not signed off on anything beyond limited mobility within the medical bay complex. And yet there he was in full uniform, with his right arm in the sling, standing at the evaluation station with a clipboard in his left hand and an expression that dared anyone to question his presence. Ava looked at him. He looked back. "You're not cleared to be here," she said quietly as she set her case down at the assigned position. "My evaluating officer credentials cleared me," he said. "Tran approved it this morning." "Your doctor is not my commanding officer," Park said. "Tran is." He shifted the clipboard. "Stop worrying about my arm and focus on the course." Major Tran stepped forward before Ava could respond, and the official portion of the morning began. Private Morales. This evaluation consists of 4 stages. Stage 1, static target engagement at 400 meters. Stage 2, moving target engagement at 600 meters. Stage 3, multi-target sequence at 800 meters. Stage 4, a field scenario with environmental variables and a time constraint. Tran's voice was clear and precise. No warmth, no chill, purely professional. You will be evaluated on accuracy, process articulation, target acquisition speed, and decision-making under pressure. Sergeant Park will serve as your spotter for the field scenario only. For stages 1 through 3, you operate independently. A pause. Questions? "No, ma'am," Ava said. "Then we begin. 16 minutes. Stage 1 was not a test of her ability. She knew that, and Park had told her that 400 meters was a competency baseline, a floor check the board, making sure she could hit what she aimed at before they started asking harder questions. She ran it clean. 4 targets, 4 rounds, all center mass. The last one called at a slight angle that required a minor hold correction, she made without hesitation. The captain with the neutral expression made a note. Stage 2 was where it got real. Moving target at 600 meters. The target was a mechanized sled system she had been told running on a track at variable speed with 2 programmed direction changes. She had practiced against a simulated version. Park had described the system to her in exhaustive detail and made her run mental tracking exercises against it every morning, but she had never fired against it live. She got into a position, she breathed, she tracked. The sled started. She followed it, not rushing, letting her eyes find the rhythm of the movement before she committed. Park's voice in her head, "You are not chasing the target. You are predicting it. There is a difference. Chasing means you are always behind. Predicting means you are where it is going before it gets there." She predicted. She fired. Hit. Not center slightly right, of center 4 inches, which in a real engagement would still be a kill, but in an evaluation was a data point. She filed it. The sled changed direction. She adjusted without recalculating from scratch, just modified the existing solution. Fired. Center mass. The sled ran its second direction change. She was ahead of it, this time already where it was going, and she held for the arrival and fired with a stillness that she could feel in her own body as a physical fact, that specific absence of internal noise that meant she was all the way inside the shot and nothing outside it existed for her at that moment. Center mass. Major Tran made a longer note this time. 24 minutes, twist 1. Stage 3, 800 meters, multi-target. She was setting up when the captain stepped forward and said, "Before you begin stage 3, the board would like you to articulate your process. Walk us through what you're going to do and why." She looked at him. This was what Park had drilled her on. Every morning out loud, articulate the process. She had done it until it felt like breathing. And now, standing with 3 evaluating officers watching her, in the morning wind running at a speed she had already calculated in a sequence of targets at 800 meters that she needed to put rounds through in the next few minutes, she understood in her body rather than just her brain why Park had been so insistent about it. Because the articulation was not for the board. It was for her. It organized the shot before the shot. It took what lived in instinct and gave it architecture. It turned something she could feel into something she could repeat. She said it the way Park had taught her to say it. Measured, clear. Distance assessment confirmed 800, consistent with calibration. Wind reading north-northeast, approximately 14 miles per hour at the evaluation position. Probable 2 to 3 mile per hour increase at range based on observed movement in the far field. Correction application, right to left magnitude calculated. Target acquisition sequence left to right. Time between shots estimated at 12 to 15 seconds to account for repositioning without rushing. She stopped. Questions before I begin, she said. Major Tran looked at her with an expression that had not shifted from its professional neutrality since 0750, but something had moved in her eyes. Very small, very real. No questions, Tran said. Proceed. She got down, she breathed, and she ran the sequence. The first target went clean. The second went clean. The third, the angle was wrong. She felt it before she saw it, a sense that her position relative to the target had a lateral offset she hadn't fully accounted for, and she made the correction between the second and third shots, adjusted 2 inches left, held an extra half second, and fired. Clean. She got up, turned to the board. The captain was looking at his clipboard, and he was not writing anything down. He was just looking at it, and after a moment, he looked up at her and said, "The correction on target 3, what happened?" "Position drift from target 2 to 3, she said. "About 2 inches lateral. I felt it when I was transitioning." "You felt it?" "Yes, sir." "You didn't see it?" "Not visually. I felt the position in my elbows. The contact point had shifted." The captain looked at Park. Park's expression said nothing, which from Park was its own form of communication. "How long have you been shooting?" the captain asked. "Formally basic training qualification. Approximately 14 months ago." She paused. "Before that, informally, since I was 11 years old." Silence. Major Tran looked up from her notes. "Since 11, she said. "My grandfather had a farm," Ava said. "West Texas. We managed coyote problems." She held Tran's gaze. "He taught me, every summer from age 11 until I was 17. Nobody had asked. It had never come up. Not in her file, not in the administrative record, not in any conversation about her qualification scores, or the Sector 7 incident, or the evaluation. It was simply a fact of her life that she had never been given a reason to state, because nobody had ever asked the right question. Park was staring at her. She looked at him. "You didn't tell me that," he said, not accusatory, something more like wonder. "You didn't ask," she said. He made a sound, turned away. She could see from the back of his neck that he was doing something that on any other man she would have called laughing, but on Park was a subtler thing, more internal, more private. Major Tran wrote something on her clipboard that was longer than anything she had written before. 32 minutes audience hook. Stage 4. The field scenario. Tran briefed it in 3 sentences. A simulated high-value target would appear somewhere in a defined zone at an unspecified time within a 20-minute window. Ava would need to locate, confirm, and engage. Park would serve as her spotter. Environmental conditions were live, meaning whatever the wind and light were doing in the actual moment, that was what she was working with, no pre-provided calculations. "One round," Tran said. "One opportunity. If you miss or abort, the scenario ends." Ava nodded. She and Park moved to the field position together. He walked slower than usual, compensating for the arm, but he did not accept her attempt to adjust her pace to his. She tried it once, and he gave her a look that communicated everything without words. They settled into position. She got down. He positioned himself to her left, slightly elevated, close enough to read the same field she was reading. "How's the arm?" she said quietly. "Adequate," he said. "That's not actually an answer. It's the one you're getting." He lifted his spotter scope with his left hand, steadying it against his knee. "Watermind is running 14 at our position. At 400 out, I'm reading 16 to 17. At the extended range, we're probably looking at 18 variable." "I know," she said. "I know you know," he said. "I'm saying it out loud so the board can hear my process. Pay attention." She almost smiled. The specific thing about Park, thing she had come to understand over the past 3 weeks, was that everything he did that looked like instruction was actually 2 things simultaneously. He was teaching her, and he was modeling what it looked like to be exactly what he was. She was watching him work even when she was the one with her eye to the scope. She watched the field. 5 minutes, 10 minutes. Nothing moved. This was the part Park had told her was the hardest. Not the shot, the waiting. The discipline of the wait, of not letting your body stiffen, or your mind drift, or your patience erode into the kind of tense anticipation that makes you flinch when the moment actually arrives. The wait had to be inhabited like the shot, fully, deliberately, without forcing. She waited. 12 minutes and something moved at the far left of the defined zone. It was subtle. Not the target itself, the target mechanism. A slight disturbance in the way the air moved at ground level, the kind of displacement that happens when something prepares to move into position. She had grown up reading that kind of thing on flat Texas land in early morning when the light was low and everything that moved was either worth watching or worth shooting. "Left sector," she said quietly. preparing to present. Park swung the spotter scope without haste. Confirmed. Stand by. The target appeared, stationary, approximately 900 meters. The wind had shifted one click in the last 30 seconds. She had felt it before the number changed in her head, the same way she had felt the position drift on target 3. She recalculated in the space of 2 seconds. She exhaled. She said out loud for the board and for herself and for the record, 900, wind shifted to east, northeast, call it 16, adjusting hold right, magnitude 4 inches at range. Target stationary. Taking the shot on next natural respiratory pause. Park said nothing. He didn't need to. She fired. The sound of the round leaving the rifle, the immediate mechanical feedback of the action, the half second of held breath while the dead had traveled back from downrange, and then Park's voice absolutely flat, absolutely professional, giving her the result the way he would give any result without theater. Center mass, he said, confirmed kill. She kept her eye to the scope for another 3 seconds. Training. Confirmation. The habit Park had drilled into her, you do not move from position until you have confirmed, because the moment you move is the moment you commit to the read, and the read has to be right. She confirmed. She got up. Park was already getting to his feet, left hand on the ground for support, sling arm held carefully against his body. She didn't offer her hand and he didn't look for it. He just rose steadied and turned toward the board with the unhurried composure of a man reporting a result he had expected. 900-meter confirmed engagement, he said to Tran. First round, wind shift mid-scenario correction applied in real time, verbalized before shot. He paused. Evaluation complete. Major Tran looked at Ava, not at her clipboard, not at her notes. At Ava. Private Morales, she said. In 22 years of SOTC evaluation, I have seen 4 candidates make a wind shift correction of that magnitude verbally in real time before the shot. Ava waited. 4, Tran said again. 2 of them are currently in Senior Special Operations Command. 1 is instructing at the training academy. She paused. 1 is standing to your left with his arm in a sling. Park's jaw moved. Nothing else. I'll have the formal certification paperwork to Lieutenant Colonel Morrison by 1400, Tran said. Congratulations, Specialist Morales. Specialist. The word landed differently than she had expected. Not like a reward, Morrison. More like a correction, like the world finally using the right word for something that had always been true. She stood in the field with the wind running at 18 miles per hour east-northeast, and the evaluation board walking away behind her, and Park standing at her left shoulder, and she let it be real for exactly the amount of time it took to take one full breath. Then Reed's voice came from somewhere behind the observation line, not contained, not professional, just Reed being Reed in the specific way that meant he had stopped managing his reaction. That's my girl, he said. She turned around. Reed had both fists raised. Decker was standing next to him with his arms crossed and his chin lifted, and his expression doing the complicated thing it did when he was moved by something and was not willing to admit it fully. Richards was there too, and Chin had been standing at the back of the observation line the whole time she realized, and he was nodding, slow and continuous. The nod of a man who has updated his understanding of something fundamental. She looked at them. She thought about the first morning in this compound, handing Decker his ammunition like a vending machine while he looked through her. She thought about sitting alone at the far end of the mess for 6 months. She thought about carrying boxes in the dark at 0500 and feeling every single morning the specific quiet ache of being exactly capable enough to see your own invisibility. She thought about the shot. She thought about the moment before she squeezed the trigger. Her grandmother's quiet world, the held breath, the stillness that was not absence but presence, so complete it felt like absence. And she thought standing in the wind, with her rifle in her hands, and the evaluation complete and specialist on her record, in the mission 17 days out, that she was not done thinking about any of it. That the weight of it, the shot, the man on the ridge, the fact of having taken a life with the same hands that were holding this rifle right now had not resolved and was not going to resolve quickly. That Park had been right, that Morrison had been right, that she would carry it, and that carrying it did not mean being destroyed by it. It meant being shaped by it. She walked back toward the group. 40 minutes twist 2. Morrison was waiting at the entrance to the compound. Not with celebration, with the specific controlled expression he wore when he was managing information he did not yet want to deliver but had run out of time to delay. She saw it, and something in her went on alert immediately, the same reflex that had lifted her out of the vehicle on the Sector 7 road. What? She said. Walk with me, he said. They walked to the edge of the compound, away from the returning evaluation group. Hargrove filed a second grievance this morning, Morrison said, before the evaluation results. This one is not with Briggs. She looked at him. Who? Inspector General's office, Morrison said. He's alleging that the commendations filed by Park and myself constitute improper command influence on an active disciplinary matter. He's arguing that we interfered with the integrity of the process by filing documentation that was designed to preempt the hearing. She was quiet for a moment. Can he make that argument legally? He can make it, Morrison said. Whether it goes anywhere is a different question. But the IG's office has to take it seriously regardless of the merits because of the rank involved. Hargrove knows that. He's using process as a weapon. He's been doing that from the beginning, she said. Yes. Morrison's jaw set. This time it has more reach. The IG's involvement means Briggs cannot simply close it. It has to run its course. She processed that. How long does it run? 30 days minimum, possibly 60. He looked at her carefully. During that period, your certification is valid. The mission is not affected. Your designation stands. A pause. But Hargrove's name is in the file next to yours, and that is going to be visible to anyone who looks at your record for the duration. She thought about the mission. 17 days out. High priority target. The corridor that would require everything she had spent the last 3 weeks building. She thought about running that mission with an open IG investigation in her file with Hargrove's name attached to hers in official documentation. She thought about what it would have been like 6 months ago to hear that the system was still working to reduce her. How it would have felt the exhaustion of it, the specific grinding fatigue of being capable and being told in increasingly official language that your capability was the problem. She noticed that it did not feel that way now. It felt like Hargrove. It felt like a man who had shoved her against a wall and whose best move now was paperwork. And paperwork was real, and paperwork had consequences. And she was not dismissing it, but she was also seeing it clearly for what it was, and what it was smaller than it would have seemed to her 3 weeks ago. I'll need to make a statement to the IG, she said. Yes, within 14 days of the filing. I'll write it tonight. Morrison looked at her. Ava, he said. He never used her first name. She registered it the way she had registered it from Reed as a signal of something more direct being offered. This is going to be hard. What Hargrove is doing is legal and deliberate, and it's designed to cost you something even if it ultimately fails. I want you to know that I understand that. I know you understand it, she said. And I want you to know that Park and I will both provide statements. Tran has already indicated she will provide an evaluator's account. Briggs, he stopped. Briggs, she said. Morrison was quiet for a moment in a way that meant what he was about to say was significant. Briggs called me 40 minutes ago, he said. He has seen the evaluation results. Tran sent preliminary numbers directly to him, not standard procedure, but within her authority. He told me, another pause. He told me that he is prepared to appear before the IG himself if the investigation requires witness statements at that level. She stared at him. A general, she said slowly, is prepared to appear before the Inspector General. For me. For the principal, Morrison said carefully. But yes, he met her eyes. You are not alone in this, Morales. I need you to hear that as clearly as I can say it. She heard it. She stood for a moment in the wind, and she heard it all the way through. Then she said, I need to tell Park. He already knows, Morrison said. He heard about the IG filing 20 minutes before you did. He was going to tell you himself, but I got here first. How is he? Morrison's expression shifted slightly in a way that was almost humor. Furious, he said. Controlled but furious, he drafted a statement on that whiteboard before I left the medical bay, in capital letters. She let out a breath, something that was shaped like a laugh and felt like relief. Okay, she said. Okay, Morrison said. Hargrove filed with the IG, she said. Briggs is prepared to testify. Park is writing his statement in capital letters on a whiteboard with his left hand. And I have a mission in 17 days that I just certified for. She looked at Morrison steadily. I said, okay. He looked at her for a long moment. When this is all over, he said, I would very much like to know how a supply runner from West Texas became the most unbreakable person in this unit. I wasn't unbreakable, she said. I was just already broken in all the places that count. He didn't have an answer for that. He nodded once and they walked back, 48 minutes. The afternoon passed in the specific way that significant days pass faster than ordinary days, more textured each hour containing more than an hour usually holds. She wrote the preliminary notes for her IG statement. She went to see Park, who had indeed covered an entire section of the whiteboard in capital letter grievances about Hargrove's tactics that were technically unprintable but represented, she thought, the most authentic emotional response she had seen from him since she'd known him. She ate dinner with the team properly at the same table for the first time, and nobody made anything of it. They just moved to make room, and that was its own profound statement in its quietness. Decker sat across from her and talked about the evaluation in the technical, dissecting way. He talked about all field performance, what had worked and why, and what could be tighter. And she answered him in kind. And somewhere in the middle of that conversation, she realized that it felt like being part of something. Not peripheral to it, not supplying it, part of it. She had not known exactly how much she had wanted that until it arrived. After dinner, Reed walked with her back toward the bunk area, and they stopped at the edge of the motor pool, the same place he had found her the night after the disciplinary hearing, both hands flat on the hood of her vehicle. She looked at the vehicle. It was still assigned to her. Supply vehicle secondary route, because the administrative reclassification hadn't caught up to the operational reality, which was a kind of institutional absurdity that she had stopped finding surprising. Weird to look at it, Reed said. A little, she said. You're not going to be running it anymore. I know. Some other supply runner is going to load that vehicle at 0500 and not know that the person who used to run it made an 830-meter shot with a borrowed rifle and broke every assumption anyone had about what she was capable of. She looked at the vehicle for another moment. I hope they're not invisible, she said quietly. Whoever runs it next, I hope somebody sees them. Reed was quiet. You're going to make sure of that, he said. Not by intending to, just by being what you are from now on in front of people who are paying attention. She thought about that, about the supply runners she had passed every day for 6 months, other Avas maybe, in other units, other roles, other corridors, carrying boxes in the dark, and qualifying an expert on ranges that nobody checked, in waiting for the world to correct a mistake it didn't know it had made. She had been given the correction by accident, by a mission going wrong in exactly the right way at exactly the moment she happened to be 2 kilometers behind it with the right weapon in the wrong vehicle. That was not a replicable scenario. She knew that. She was not naive enough to think her story was a blueprint. It was a specific collision of circumstances that had opened a door that should have been open from the beginning. But she was through the door now, and the mission was 17 days out. And Hargrove's name was in a file next to hers at the Inspector General's office, and that was real, and that was a fight that was not over. But she had learned something in the last 3 weeks that she had not fully known before. Not about shooting, not about wind correction or target acquisition or the psychology of the long shot. She had learned it from Briggs in a kitchen at 0400 from Park on a whiteboard with his left hand from Decker at a tent flap saying, I'm sorry we didn't see you from Reed standing at a range in the dark because he knew she needed someone there, even though nobody had asked. She had learned that the right people, when they finally see you, see everything, and she was not invisible anymore. 17 days, she said. 17 days, Reed confirmed. She took one more look at the vehicle, at the life she had lived inside it for 6 months. At the person she had been when she drove it, capable and precise and completely unseen, holding all of it quietly inside, waiting for something she couldn't have named. She had not known she was waiting for a canyon in Sector 7. She had not known the shot was coming. She turned away from the vehicle. Tomorrow, Morrison had said the mission briefing would begin in earnest. Full intelligence package, full team read-in operational planning. She would sit at the table, not at the edge of the room, not outside the door with the supply manifest, but at the table with the designation specialist on her record and the evaluation results filed with SOTs in Park's left-hand capital letters in the official record next to her name. She would sit at the table and she would do the job. Not the job she had been given, the job she had always been. The wind was still running north-northeast 18 miles per hour with the variable she had noted all day. She had been tracking it unconsciously since morning, the way you track weather when weather is your work. It had been consistent. It had been readable. She filed the final reading in her head the way she filed everything precisely without waste available for use when use was required. Then she went to bed. And outside the compound, 17 days from a mission and 30 days from an IG resolution and an indeterminate distance from whatever Hargrove had decided to do next, the wind ran its course across the open ground the same way wind always runs without regard for rank or file or anyone's plan for how things were supposed to go. It simply moved, and she had already accounted for it. The mission briefing started at 0600 on the first day of the 17th countdown, and Ava walked into that room the same way she had walked out of Hargrove's tent 3 weeks ago, back straight, cap squared, every part of her surface calm, while everything underneath ran at full speed. The difference was that this time, when she pulled out a chair at the table, nobody looked at her like she had made a mistake. Morrison had the intelligence package open on the center display. Full team present. Decker, Reed, Richards, Chen. 2 operators she knew by sight, but not well. And Park, who had been cleared for limited duty. 2 days ahead of his medical projection, and had accepted that clearance with the exact zero amount of surprise that she had come to expect from him. He sat at the end of the table with his sling still on, and his left hand flat on the surface, and his eyes already on the intelligence map like he had been studying it in his sleep. Maybe he had been. Target is a regional coordination figure, Morrison said without preamble. High value, high mobility. He has not stayed in one location longer than 72 hours in the past 4 months. We have a projected window, 48 hours, possibly less, where intelligence puts him at a fixed location deep in the Eastern Corridor. He looked at the map. Getting eyes on that location from any angle that doesn't compromise the approach means a long-range engagement position. Minimum effective distance from the nearest covered approach is 960 meters. Why am I down here? He looked at Ava. She looked at the map. 960 meters. She had hit 900 in the evaluation. The additional 60 was math she could do in her head right now, and the answer did not frighten her. Conditions in the Eastern Corridor this time of year, she said. Wind pattern. Variable, Reed Morrison said. Predominantly west-southwest with documented afternoon shift across canyon. Intelligence has environmental data going back 90 days. He slid a folder across the table to her. Park has already reviewed it. And she said to Park directly. Manageable, Park said. The afternoon shift is predictable enough to plan around. We time the window for mid-morning, we avoid the worst of it. He paused. But you're not shooting in a window, Morales. You're shooting when the target presents. You plan for mid-morning and you stay flexible. Understood, she said. Decker leaned forward. Extraction is the problem. The position that gives you the shot is also the position that gives you the least favorable extraction route if the engagement draws response. We have 3 minutes from shot to when we need to be moving. 2.5, Reed said. I ran the route twice this morning on the model. 3 minutes is optimistic. Then we work with 2.5, Ava said. The room was quiet for a second. Not uncomfortable quiet, the specific quiet of a group of people recalibrating, absorbing the fact that the person who had been supply was now the one defining operational constraints, and nobody at the table was reaching for a reason to question it. She felt it. She didn't remark on it. They had work to do. Minutes audience hook. The briefing ran 3 hours. By the end of it, she had memorized the route, the position, the extraction sequence, the contingency routes for 2 different failure scenarios, the communication protocol, the abort conditions. She had cross-referenced the environmental data against her own wind reading experience and identified 2 periods in the daily cycle she considered optimal and 1 she considered unacceptable. She had argued with Decker about the contingency extraction and she had argued with Reed about the comms protocol and lost, and both of those things felt completely natural and correct. When Morrison closed the briefing, he looked at the team and said, wheels up in 72 hours, use the time. People started moving. Chairs pushed back. The low-register sounds of a team shifting from planning to preparation. Park stayed seated. Ava stayed seated. When the room had emptied to just the 2 of them, he looked at her across the table. How are you? He said. Not a pleasantry. A genuine operational question from someone who had been her spotter and her instructor, and something harder to name than either of those things, and who was asking, because the answer mattered. I'm ready, she said. That's not what I asked. She looked at him. I'm scared, she said. Not of the shot, of after the shot, of what it does to me the second time that it did to me the first time and whether I'll handle it. Park was quiet. The first time was Sector 7, he said. Yes. You handled it. I was in survival mode in Sector 7. I didn't have time to feel it until later. She held his gaze. This time I'll have time. Going in, I'll have time. I'll know what I'm about to do before I do it. Park leaned back slightly. The sling shifted against his chest and he adjusted it with a small, controlled movement that she had learned to read as pain he was not acknowledging. Do you want me to tell you it gets easier? He said. No, she said. I want you to tell me the truth. He looked at her steadily. It doesn't get easier, he said. It gets more integrated. There is a difference. He paused. You learn to hold it alongside everything else, the mission, the team, the reason the shot was necessary, and none of those things cancel each other out. They just exist together. That's what integration means. Not forgetting, not numbing, holding it all at the same time and still being able to function. She sat with that. Can you do that? He asked. She thought about the man on the ridge in Sector 7. She thought about the fact that she had thought about him every day since that she had not tried to push the thought away, but had let it sit where it sat, uncomfortable and real and necessary. Yes, she said. Then you were ready, he said. 16 minutes. The 72 hours before Wheels Up passed in the concentrated way of operational preparation, dense, purposeful, no wasted motion. She ran the route in her head so many times it became physical, her body knowing the turns before she thought them. She slept in controlled increments, 4 hours and then three, the military pattern she had learned to trust. She ate without appetite but with discipline because the body was a system that required maintenance regardless of what the mind was doing. On the last night before departure, Reed knocked on the frame of her tent. She was sitting on the edge of her bunk, rifle across her knees, running a final function check, the way she had done every night for the past 2 weeks. He stood in the entrance and looked at her for a moment. "You know it's clean," he said. "You checked it this morning." "I'm checking it again." "Okay," he said. He came in and sat on the footlocker across from her. "I got a letter from home today. My sister's kids started school." She looked up. Reed almost never talked about home. She had learned to recognize the rare moments he did as something offered deliberately with intention. "Boy or girl?" she said. "Girl, 5 years old, wrote her name on the first day and apparently it was perfect, like she'd been doing it for years." He smiled briefly, the private smile of someone imagining something they weren't present for. "My sister said she walked in like she owned the place." Ava looked at him. "Reed," she said, "why are you telling me this right now?" He looked at his hands for a moment. "Because tomorrow is a big day," he said, "and I have noticed that you are very good at being prepared for big days, but sometimes you forget that you're allowed to also be a person while you're being prepared." He looked up. "So, small things. My niece walked into school like she owned it." He paused. "What's a small thing from you?" She was quiet for a moment. "Then my grandmother made tamales every Christmas, not from a recipe, from memory. She said the recipe was in her hands, not on paper." She paused. "Last Christmas I tried to make them. Mine were wrong, not bad, just not hers." "You'll try again next Christmas," Reed said. "Yeah," she said. "I will." He nodded, got up, moved to the entrance. "Get some sleep." "Morales," he said. "Reed," he stopped. "Thank you," she said, "for all of it, from the beginning." He stood in the entrance for a moment. "You did the work," he said. "I just showed up." He left. She set the rifle in its case, lay back on the bunk, and looked at the ceiling. She thought about her grandmother's hands. She thought about the recipe that lived in muscle and bone and accumulated repetition, not on paper. She thought about her grandfather's voice on flat Texas land in early morning telling her 11-year-old self not how to shoot, not the mechanics of it, but something underneath the mechanics. Watch first. Wait until you know. Then be still and let the knowing come through you. She had been still in Sector 7. She had been still in the evaluation. Tomorrow she would be still again. She closed her eyes. 24 minutes, twist 1. They were 40 minutes from the insertion point when Morrison's radio produced a sound that changed the shape of the mission. The vehicle went quiet instantly. Every person in it operating on the same trained reflex, radio changes, tone, everything stops. You listen. The voice on the other end was Tron's. Not a scheduled check-in. Unscheduled contact from SOTC during an active insertion meant one of a specific set of things, and none of them were neutral. "Morrison," Tran said, "we have an intelligence update. Target location is confirmed, but we have a second presence at the site that was not in the original package." A pause that lasted exactly long enough to tell Ava that what came next was significant. "Hargrove is at the location." Silence in the vehicle. Ava went very still. "Say again," Morrison said. "Colonel Richard Hargrove. He arrived at the target location approximately 6 hours ago. We are reading his tracking signal and he is inside the structure with the target." Tran's voice was controlled and clean, but something moved underneath it. "Intelligence is working on what that means. What we know right now is that your mission just got significantly more complicated." Morrison looked at Ava. She looked back at him. "Hargrove, at the target location, inside the structure with a high-value enemy coordination figure." The math of that assembled itself in her head in about 3 seconds, and what it assembled into was something she was not going to say out loud in this vehicle without more information, because what it assembled into was a possibility so extreme that stating it prematurely would do nothing useful and might do real damage. She watched Morrison's face run the same calculation. "Tranit," he said, "is there any operational explanation for his presence?" "Command is working to establish one," Tran said. "Right now, there is no record of any authorized visit liaison activity or intelligence operation that would place Hargrove at that location." "Understood," Morrison said. "What are our orders?" "Mission continues," Tran said. "Target remains the objective, But you need to know what you are walking into. Another pause. Morrison, whatever Hargrove is doing there, and I want to be clear that we do not yet know what that is, your team's engagement protocols do not change. Target is the target. Hargrove is a colonel in active service until told otherwise. Copy, Morrison said. Tran signed off. Nobody in the vehicle spoke for a full 10 seconds. Then Decker said very quietly, "What do we think we know right now?" "We don't know anything right now," Morrison said. It was a command statement, not a conversation, the tone that meant stop speculating and focus. He looked around the vehicle. "What we know is the mission, target location, window extraction. Everything else is above our pay grade until we're told otherwise." "Clear, clear," said the team. Morrison looked at Ava last. She met his eyes. "Clear," she said. But inside, something was moving very fast and very hard, the way water moves under ice, contained by the surface, but absolutely not still. Because she had spent 3 weeks with Hargrove's name in a file next to hers, and Hargrove's hands on her collar, and Hargrove's voice saying this isn't over. And now Hargrove was inside a building with an enemy coordinator, and there was no authorized reason for him to be there, and she was the one with the rifle. 32 minutes audience hook. The insertion went clean. Decker and Reed took the perimeter positions. Chen and Richards ran the near side approach. Morrison positioned himself at the command point close enough to maintain visual on Ava's position, far enough to keep the sightline clear. She went to the ridge. Park was not with her. The arm had held up through briefings and limited movement, but the insertion terrain was beyond what his doctor would accept and beyond what she would accept for him. He had known it, and he had not argued. He had gripped her arm with his left hand when they separated at the staging point and said simply, "You know everything you need to know." She had nodded. She was alone on the ridge. Which was, she realized as she settled into position and the scope came up and the field clarified into the clean visual geometry of a long-range engagement exactly how it should be. The sniper's work was ultimately solitary. The team was the architecture around it, the support structure, the reason the position was possible. But the shot was hers alone, the same way the choice in Sector 7 had been hers alone, the same way every moment of standing in her own capability had been hers alone, even when everyone around her had been looking somewhere else. She breathed. She watched. The structure below was quiet from the outside. Intel had the target on the second-level eastern room, a pattern of movement that appeared at the window every 40 to 60 minutes based on 6 hours of observation. She had 20 minutes before the next projected appearance. She used the 20 minutes. Not to wait to inhabit. The distinction Park had drawn between the passive endurance of waiting and the active discipline of inhabiting the position the moment the full sensory and mental field. She tracked the wind. She felt the surface beneath her elbows. She ran the distance 960 meters through her calculation one more time and let the answer settle into her hands where it would live when the moment came. Morrison's voice came low through the earpiece. "Position check." "Set," she said. "Window is in approximately 15 minutes. We have movement inside possible early presentation." "Copy." Then after a pause that had a different quality than the operational pauses, "Morales, command has been in contact regarding Hargrove." She kept her eye to the scope. "And he is being recalled immediately. There are people above Briggs who have seen the tracking data, and there is a process beginning." Morrison's voice was careful in the way it was careful when he was saying the minimum necessary amount and trusting her to hear what was underneath it. "The IG investigation into your record is being suspended pending the larger inquiry." She processed that. "Suspended," she said, "not closed." "Suspended with prejudice toward the party who initiated it," Morrison said. Tran's words. She said nothing for a moment, kept her breathing even, kept her eye on the field. What Morrison was telling her in the language of careful professional understatement was that the man who had shoved her against a wall and called her a box carrier and weaponized every system available to him to reduce her, that man was now inside a building that her rifle was pointed at for reasons that were apparently significant enough to mobilize people above Briggs, and the process beginning above Briggs was the kind of process that did not end quietly. She felt something move through her, not satisfaction, something more complicated than satisfaction, something that involved the weight of 3 weeks of Hargrove's name in her file and 6 months of carrying boxes in the dark and one shot from 830 meters that had started all of this, and the recognition that systems, however slowly, however imperfectly, did sometimes correct themselves, not through justice, exactly, not through the clean resolution you wanted, but through the accumulation of facts that became too heavy to keep suppressing. The facts had gotten heavy enough. "Copy," she said, standing by. 40 minutes twist 2. The target appeared at the window 11 minutes later, not the projected 40-minute cycle early, which meant either the cycle had changed or something inside the structure had prompted movement. She tracked the appearance and held. Visual, she said quietly. Confirmed, Morrison said. She ran the calculation. Wind had shifted 3 degrees in the last 8 minutes. She had tracked it continuously, and the adjustment was already incorporated, living in her hands rather than her head. Distance confirmed at 960. The presentation at the window was partial left shoulder and head, eastern angle, the geometry not quite what she needed for the shot she had planned. She waited, Park's voice in her head, "You are not chasing, you are predicting." She predicted. The target moved, a small adjustment inward, the kind of unconscious shift a person makes when they are looking out a window and recalibrate their weight. The geometry opened by approximately 8 inches. It was enough. She exhaled. Half breath, hold. And in that held space between the exhale and the shot, in the stillness that her grandfather had called the knowing coming through you, she felt the full weight of everything that had brought her to this ridge. The supply route, the boxes in the dark, the moment she had heard Morrison's voice on the radio saying Park is down, the rifle she had not been assigned to carry, the shot she had not been ordered to take, Hargrove's hands on her collar, Briggs in the kitchen, Park's whiteboard, the evaluation in the wind, 17 days of becoming formally and officially what she had always been. All of it in one held breath. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle fired. She stayed in position, eye to the scope, 3 seconds, confirmation protocol, the discipline of not moving until you know. Confirmed, Morrison said. His voice had the same quality it had carried in Sector 7 in the canyon after the first shot, something raw underneath the professional surface relief, and something that might have been awe, though Morrison would never have used that word. She did not move for another full second. Then she said very quietly to no one who could hear her, "I see you, Grandpa." And she got up. Already 8 minutes. The extraction ran at 2 minutes 40 seconds, which was 10 seconds better than Reed's best model per projection, and which he reported with a satisfaction he made no effort to conceal when they cleared the perimeter and hit the vehicle. Nobody talked during the vehicle movement. This was normal. The immediate post-engagement period was its own kind of compressed silence, everyone processing in the specific way their training and experience had shaped. She sat in the passenger seat and kept her breathing slow and watched the terrain move past and let herself feel what she needed to feel without performing it for anyone. She felt it. The familiar weight from Sector 7 settling back in the gravity of having taken a life deliberate and precise for reasons she believed in completely, and which did not make the gravity lighter. Park had been right. Not easier, more integrated. She held it alongside the mission and the team and the reason, and it was heavy and it was real, and she was not destroyed by it. She was shaped by it. That was the difference. Morrison called in the engagement confirmation at the 45-minute mark. Clean, professional, the clipped language of an operational report. He did not look at her when he made the call. He didn't need to. She could feel in the specific way you can feel things about people you have been through significant events with, that he was completely aware of every detail of her presence in that vehicle. When he finished the call, he was quiet for a moment. "Then Tran wants a debrief at base, 0900. "Copy," she said. "Briggs will be on the line." She looked at him. Briggs personally. He asked to be included. Morrison held the road with his eyes. He said, and I'm quoting, that he would like to hear from Specialist Morales directly. She said nothing for a moment. She thought about a trim, quiet man in his late 50s, sitting in a kitchen at 0400, saying, "I have spent 31 years watching capable people get lost in systems that weren't built to find them." "All right," she said. Reed's voice came from the back seat, low and calm. "For what it's worth, today was, I've run a lot of missions. Today was," he stopped. The specific stop of someone who has run into the edge of what words can do. "Yeah," Decker said, "just that." She understood. She left it there. 56 minutes, final twist. The debrief ran 90 minutes and Briggs was on the line for all of it. He said very little. He listened in the way powerful people listen when they have decided that listening is what the moment requires fully without performing attention actually present. Tran ran the technical review. Morrison provided the operational account. Ava gave her engagement report in the precise process articulated form Park had built her for, and she heard Briggs make one brief sound when she described the wind shift correction, the same sound a person makes when something confirms what they already thought they knew. At the end of the debrief, when Tran had closed the technical portion and was preparing to sign off, Briggs spoke. "Morales," he said. "Sir, the IG investigation against you is formally closed as of this morning. The initiating party's clearance is under separate review, and that is not your concern." A pause. What is your concern? What I want you to hear from me directly is that your record is clean, cleaner than clean. The Sector 7 commendation, the evaluation certification, today's engagement, all of it is in the record. All of it stands. She sat with that. Thank you, sir, she said. Don't thank me, Briggs said with the same directness he had used in the kitchen. The record reflects what happened. I didn't create that. You did. Another pause. I have one question. Sir, supply logistics to confirmed sniper specialist in 3 weeks, he said. Most people who are pushed that hard, that fast, and that publicly either break or overcorrect. You did neither. How? She thought about her answer for a moment. The real answer, not the clean one. I had people who showed up, she said. Morrison, Park, Reed, Decker, even Chen eventually. She paused. And I had 18 years of my grandfather teaching me that the shot doesn't change based on who's watching. The physics don't change. You don't change. She held the phone. I just had to remember that was true. Briggs was quiet for a moment. I'm recommending you for the Special Operations Integration track, he said. Full consideration for advanced placement in SOTC's Long-Range Specialist Program. That recommendation will go through channels and it will take the time it takes, but it is moving. She opened her mouth, closed it. Park across the table he had joined the debrief by phone from the medical base said nothing. But she heard him breathe, and in that breath was everything. Sir, she said, I don't know what to say. Then don't say anything, Briggs said. Just keep doing what you've been doing. A brief pause, and then something shifted in his voice very slightly, barely audible, but there. Something more human than general. Your grandfather would be proud. The line closed. She sat for a moment in the debrief room with Morrison and Tran, and the ghost of Briggs's voice, and the weight of everything that had happened in the past. She counted it 24 days since she had heard Morrison's voice in a static cut radio saying Park is down. 24 days. From supply runner to specialist, from invisible to on record, from carrying boxes in the dark to sitting in a debrief room with a general's recommendation moving through channels and a mission behind her and a program ahead of her and every part of herself intact. She had not broken. She had not overcorrected. She had just been consistently and without apology exactly what she was. Tran caught her eye across the table. The program will be demanding, she said. It was not a warning. It was information stated neutrally between two professionals. I know, Ava said. You will be the only woman in the cohort, Tran said. Possibly for several cycles. I know that too, Ava said. Tran held her gaze for a moment, and then she said something that Ava had not expected from the woman who had maintained professional neutrality from 0750 straight through the evaluation without a single crack. In 22 years, Tran said I have been the only woman in more rooms than I can count. She paused. It is harder than the shot, and it is survivable. A beat. You've already proven both. She stood and gathered her materials and walked out. Ava sat alone in the room. She thought about everything. She let herself do that, the full accounting, the whole sweep of it, without rushing through to the part where it resolved into meaning. The Sector 7 canyon, the bruise on her shoulder, Hargrove's face, Park's whiteboard, the evaluation in the wind at 900 meters with Tran's eyes on her, and the target appearing 8 minutes early. The debrief. Briggs's voice saying your grandfather would be proud. She thought about the supply vehicle sitting in the motor pool with someone else's name on the manifest now or soon. She thought about being 11 years old on flat Texas land in the low light of early morning, lying still in the grass, while her grandfather's voice told her, wait until you know, and the feeling of knowing arriving not as a thought, but as a physical fact moving from somewhere deep and settled outward through her hands. She had always had that. She had always been this. The system hadn't built it. The evaluation hadn't created it. Morrison and Park and Briggs hadn't given it to her. They had simply finally gotten out of the way of something that had been there from the beginning, waiting with the patience of a person who has learned that the shot does not change based on who is watching. She got up from the table. She picked up her rifle case. She walked out of the room and into the compound, and the day was bright, and the wind was running west-southwest at approximately 12 miles per hour, slightly down from the morning, and she noted it the way she noted everything now, precisely without waste filed for future use. Reed was waiting outside. Of course he was. How'd it go, he said. She thought about Briggs' voice, about Tran's 22 years, about the program moving through channels. Good, she said. Really good. He looked at her, and whatever he saw on her face made him nod slowly, the way people nod when a thing they were hoping for has actually arrived. Coffee, he said. Yeah, she said. Let's go. They walked across the compound together, and the wind ran at 12 miles per hour west-southwest, and somewhere in a medical bay, Park was already back at his whiteboard with his left hand, and somewhere in a chain of institutional authority, a recommendation was moving through channels that would not stop moving. And somewhere above them, both the records stood clean and documented and permanent, containing the full account of who Ava Morales was and what she had done and what it had cost her and what it had not cost her. Private Ava Morales had been a supply runner. Then she had taken the shot, and the shot had told the truth about her, the truth she had always carried through 6 months of boxes in the dark and 0500 mornings, and sitting alone at the far end of the mess, through Hargrove's hands on her collar, and the canyon in Sector 7, in a 17-day countdown, and a ridge at 960 meters in a west-southwest wind. The truth that her grandfather had put in her hands at 11 years old on flat Texas land, in the stillness before the shot when the world goes quiet and the knowing comes through you. She had always been a sniper. It had just taken the right moment and the worst moment for everyone else to finally see it.